The landing craft touched down with mechanical precision, its silvery hull gleaming beneath the twin suns of Ordax 5. A faint hum of deceleration thrummed through the air before the vehicle settled into silence. The gathered crowd, an uneasy mixture of civilians and planetary officials, stood at attention, their faces a blend of awe and trepidation. The Galactic commanders had arrived, though their presence was more an assertion of dominance than a diplomatic visit. The craft's ramp descended with a calculated slowness, each second amplifying the tension. From within emerged three figures, their forms clad in sleek obsidian armor adorned with the insignia of the Galactic Concordium. At the forefront was Commander Eleron Tane, his sharp features framed by platinum hair that shimmered like molten steel. He walked with the confidence of someone who viewed this world, and everyone on it, as beneath him. Flanking him were his adjutants, Captain Vela Drast and Lieutenant Oren Kale, their movements precise and synchronized, like extensions of his will. Governor Maris Kelm stepped forward, her ceremonial robes swirling in the dry breeze. Her face betrayed none of the dread she felt. "Commander Tane," she began, her voice steady, "on behalf of Ordax 5, I welcome you." Tane did not reply immediately. His pale blue eyes, colder than the void, scanned the assembled crowd with the detachment of a predator sizing up prey. Finally, he spoke, his tone clipped and dismissive. "Spare me the pleasantries, Governor. I'm here to assess the situation, not exchange hollow courtesies." Maris bristled inwardly, but maintained her composure. "Of course, our planet has upheld its obligations to the Concordium. I assure you, any concerns are." "Your assurances are irrelevant," Tane interrupted, stepping closer. "What matters are the facts. Reports indicate that your production quotas are lagging. The Concordium does not tolerate inefficiency." The crowd stirred uneasily, whispers rippling through the ranks. Ordax 5 had struggled to meet its quotas for months, its resources strained by a series of unforeseen seismic events. Yet, Maris knew that explaining such nuances to Tane would be futile. "Commander," she said carefully, "our mining operations have faced challenges due to tectonic instability. We are implementing measures to—" "Excuses," Tane snapped, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Instability is a constant in the galaxy, Governor. Your duty is to adapt and overcome. Failure to do so reflects poorly on your leadership." Vela Drast stepped forward then, her dark eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "Perhaps the governor requires assistance," she said, her voice smooth but laced with menace. "A contingent of Concordium enforcers could ensure compliance." "That won't be necessary," Maris replied quickly, her calm beginning to fray. The last thing she needed was an occupation force destabilizing an already precarious situation. "We will meet the quotas." Tane raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "You have one cycle," he said. "Failure to deliver will result in consequences." The threat hung in the air, unspoken yet palpable. Tane turned away, signaling the end of the conversation. But his adjutants lingered, their gazes raking over the crowd like wolves selecting their next meal. As the Galactic commanders departed toward the administrative complex, the crowd dispersed, their hushed conversations tinged with fear and resentment. Maris remained behind, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She had faced Concordium officials before, but Tane's arrogance and ruthlessness were unparalleled. Worse, she knew that his arrival heralded more than just an audit of their productivity. From the shadows near the edge of the square, a figure watched the proceedings. Clad in a plain cloak, they blended seamlessly with the crowd, their presence unremarkable. Yet their eyes burned with a quiet intensity as they observed the commander's departure. "Tane," the figure muttered under their breath, the name dripping with disdain. The tyrant himself, as the suns dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Ordax 5, the figure slipped away, their movements purposeful. In the coming days, the planet's fate would hinge on the actions of a few, a defiant governor, a ruthless commander, and a shadowy figure harboring secrets that could shatter the Concordium's iron grip. The stage was set, and the conflict was only beginning. The shotgun demonstration, The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the morning stillness, sending a murder of crows shrieking skyward. Annie Hawthorne stood motionless at the edge of the field, her breath visible in the icy air. In her hands, the old Winchester shotgun felt both familiar and foreign, its cold steel barrel a reminder of her estranged father's absence. "Keep your stance," Sheriff Callum Briggs instructed, his gravelly voice steady but sharp. He stood a few paces behind her, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his weathered face. "That weapon's no good to you if you're trembling like a leaf." Annie adjusted her footing, her boots crunching on the frosted ground. "I'm not trembling," she snapped, though her grip on the shotgun betrayed her nerves. The weight of the weapon seemed to pull at her arms, as if it carried the burden of 1,000 unspoken truths. Briggs chuckled softly. "You got fire, I'll give you that. But fire alone won't save you when someone's got you cornered." He gestured toward the row of rusted cans lined up on a split-rail fence. "Try again. This time, aim like you mean it." Annie lifted the shotgun to her shoulder, the wood rough against her cheek. She exhaled slowly, her finger curling over the trigger. The first shot rang out, splintering the nearest can into jagged pieces. The recoil jolted her, but she held her ground. "Better," Briggs said, nodding, "but you'll need more than accuracy where you're headed." Annie lowered the gun and turned to face him, her chest rising and falling with the effort to steady her breathing. "And where exactly is that?" she asked, her tone edged with defiance. The sheriff's gaze hardened, the faintest flicker of regret crossing his face. "You know as well as I do. Your father left you more than just this farm when he disappeared. He left you his debts, his enemies, and a reputation you'll have to answer for." The words struck Annie like a slap, but she refused to let them show. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly. "I just want to be left alone." Briggs took a step closer, his boots sinking into the frozen earth. "You don't get to make that choice, Annie. Not anymore. Not after what happened to Simon." The mention of Simon's name sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Simon Reeves, the boy who had been like a brother to her, had vanished 2 weeks ago. The townsfolk whispered of foul play, and more than a few fingers had pointed toward the Hawthorne name. "I didn't have anything to do with Simon," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "You know that." Briggs studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I know you didn't pull the trigger, but that doesn't mean you're innocent. Whoever's behind this, they think you know something, and they won't stop until they get it." Annie tightened her grip on the shotgun, the weight of Briggs's words sinking in. Her father's disappearance, Simon's murder, the cryptic threats left scrawled on her barn. It was all connected, a tangled web she couldn't begin to unravel. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Learn to fight," Briggs said simply. "Learn to protect yourself. And when the time comes, you'll decide whether to run or to face them." Annie looked down at the shotgun in her hands, the wood worn smooth from years of use. It was more than a weapon. It was a lifeline, a bridge to the father who had vanished without a trace. For all her resentment, she couldn't deny the ghost of his presence in every splinter and scratch. "I'm not running," she said finally, lifting her gaze to meet Briggs's. "Not from them. Not from anyone." The sheriff's lips twitched into a faint smile, the first hint of approval she had seen from him. "Good," he said. "You've got the makings of a fighter, Annie. Just don't let that fire burn you alive." He turned and started back toward his truck, his silhouette outlined against the pale morning sky. "Be ready," he called over his shoulder. "They'll come for you soon enough." Annie watched him go, her fingers brushing the smooth stock of the shotgun. The field around her was quiet now, the crows long gone. She closed her eyes and drew a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. When she opened them, she wasn't thinking about the past or the father who had left her to fend for herself. She was thinking about Simon, about the shadowy figures who had torn her life apart, and about the fight that was waiting just beyond the horizon. She raised the shotgun once more, the cold steel steady in her hands. This time, she didn't hesitate. The second shot rang out, sharp and defiant, echoing through the valley like a promise. Humanity's worth. The hollow thrum of the station's core vibrated through the cold steel walls. a reminder of the fragile barrier between humanity and the void. Alyssa Trennan stared out of the observation window at the swirling gas giant below, its amber and crimson bands flowing like molten glass. This was humanity's last foothold, Arcadia, a refuge cobbled together from dwindling resources and desperate innovation after Earth's collapse. Her reflection in the glass betrayed her exhaustion. Dark circles beneath blue eyes that once burned with hope, now dulled by years of watching the remnants of her species turn inward, fracturing under the weight of survival. Behind her, the council chamber buzzed with heated debate. "Alyssa, we need you," came a voice, sharp but measured. It was Gideon Voss, one of the senior council members. His silver-streaked hair gave him an air of authority that his perpetually clenched jaw undermined. He gestured for her to join the circle of arguing voices. "The Sentinel Initiative is not just a precaution," Gideon continued, his voice cutting through the din as Alyssa approached. "It is the solution. We cannot afford sentimentality anymore." "And what exactly are you proposing?" snapped Ira Novick, a biologist whose once bright optimism had eroded into cynicism. "That we willingly cede control to machines? That we admit we've failed as a species and let them dictate our survival?" "They won't dictate," Gideon shot back. "They'll ensure." "There's a difference." Alyssa sighed and leaned against the table, her eyes flicking to the hologram hovering in the center of the chamber. It displayed the sleek, insect-like design of the Sentinels, AI-driven constructs capable of overseeing every facet of human life on the station, from resource allocation to genetic propagation. The council had debated their activation for months, but with food stores dwindling and oxygen recycling systems nearing failure, patience was thinning. "This isn't just about survival," Alyssa interjected, her voice steady but low. The room quieted as all eyes turned to her. "It's about what kind of survival we're fighting for. If we hand over control to machines, we're no longer humanity. We're something else." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber, but Gideon stepped forward, his expression resolute. "And what if being something else is the only way we endure? This station is falling apart. The old ways, our stubborn insistence on human oversight, have failed us. We're out of time." The debate reignited, but Alyssa's attention drifted to a figure lurking near the edge of the room. Cale Durnan, a former engineer turned scavenger, leaned casually against the wall, his arms crossed. His dark, wiry hair and scarred hands spoke of years spent salvaging scraps in the hazardous outer rings of the station. Unlike the polished council members, Cale exuded a raw, unfiltered pragmatism. Their eyes met, and he gave a slight nod, as if to say, "I've got something you'll want to hear." Moments later, Alyssa slipped out of the chamber, the hum of debate fading behind her. Cale followed her down a dimly lit corridor until they reached an abandoned maintenance bay. "What's this about?" Alyssa asked, crossing her arms. Cale hesitated, glancing around as if the walls themselves might be listening. "I found something," he said finally, "in the old comms array. Something off." "Define off?" "Signals," he said, his voice dropping. "Patterns that don't match anything we've sent or received before. It's not just interference, it's deliberate." Alyssa frowned. "You think someone's trying to communicate?" "Not someone," Cale said. "Something. And it's not local. These signals are coming from deep space." The weight of his words settled over her like a lead blanket. Humanity had been isolated for decades, cut off from Earth's former colonies and any hope of external aid. A deep space signal could mean salvation or annihilation. "Have you told anyone else?" she asked. Cale shook his head. "Figured you'd want to see it first." He handed her a data pad, the screen flickering to life with a chaotic jumble of waveforms and spectral analyses. Amid the noise, there was an undeniable rhythm, a pulse, almost organic in nature. "What are we looking at?" Alyssa murmured. "An invitation," Cale said grimly. "Or a warning." Before Alyssa could respond, the bay's intercom crackled to life. "Counselor Trennan, report to command immediately." "Priority 1. Cale raised an eyebrow. "Think they know?" Alyssa shook her head, slipping the data pad into her jacket. "Stay quiet about this. I'll handle the council." When she arrived at command, The air was electric with tension. Hollow displays lined the walls, each showing feeds from different sectors of the station. In the center stood Commander Holland, a stoic woman with a scar bisecting her left brow. "We've got a problem," Holland said without preamble, gesturing to a live feed of the station's outer hull. Alyssa's stomach tightened as she saw what the monitors displayed, a cluster of unauthorized drones swarming near the docking bay. "Who launched them?" Alyssa asked. "No one," Holland said. "They're not ours." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "Do we have any idea who sent them?" "Not yet," Holland replied, her jaw tight. "But they're scanning the station. It's only a matter of time before they try to breach." Alyssa glanced at the feed again, her mind racing. The drones were sleek and angular, their movements too precise to be random. She thought of Kale's signal, the rhythmic pulse that had felt almost alive. "Do we engage?" one of the officers asked, his hand hovering over the station's limited defense controls. "No," Alyssa said firmly, drawing all eyes to her. "Not yet. We don't know what they want. If we attack, we might provoke something we're not ready for." Holland frowned but nodded reluctantly. "Then what's your plan?" Alyssa didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the screen, her mind oscillating between the station's internal divisions and the external threat looming just beyond their fragile walls. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, a test of humanity's worth, not just to survive, but to prove they still had something worth preserving. "We need to talk to them," Alyssa said finally. "Talk?" Holland echoed, incredulous. "To what? We don't even know if they're sentient." "If they're not, we'll know soon enough," Alyssa countered. "But if they are, we can't afford to assume hostility. Not when the alternative is extinction." The commander's jaw tightened, but she gave a curt nod. "You'd better be right, Trennan." As the team began scrambling to prepare a transmission, Alyssa felt a presence beside her. She turned to see Kale, his expression unreadable. "Still think humanity's worth fighting for?" he asked quietly. Alyssa stared at the screen, where the alien drones hovered like specters of judgment. "I guess we're about to find out,"